would just add that even if the moderator isn't technically counting the ballots when the AccuVote machines are being used, the moderator will get involved perhaps in the hand counted ballots, certainly the processing of absentee ballots, and maybe making rulings on the intent of the voter in ballots that some of the election officials might have questions on when tallying them. The name badge certainly is a consideration. And I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer.
Representative Torossian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, it seems as though we maybe don't have a clear solution forward on this, but just to reiterate some of the problems, you know, in a town election, any selectmen that are up for re-election or anybody that's running would have to be up for re-election. They're not allowed to in our town, I don't know if this happens everywhere, to participate in work a shift during the polls when they were on the ballot. So it seems to, you know, and that's for a good reason. So it seems like we should carry it a step further with the moderator. However, in my district, in one of my towns, both the moderator and the assistant moderator are both current state reps. So if you said, okay, the moderator can't do it, well, the assistant moderator is also a rep. So, you know, it's problematic. I too would like to find a way forward on this, but I don't know that this part one of SB 83 is the answer.
Representative Muirhead.
As I listen to more experienced, committee members discuss this, I guess my takeaway is that there's a benefit to excluding moderators. It eliminates a conflict of interest. It eliminates an unfair advantage, and maybe most important, it eliminates the perception of an unfair advantage. But there's also a cost in that a lot of moderators who also happen to be maybe candidates for state rep are among the most experienced election officials that towns have. And so we're just weighing this benefit and the cost, and I'm trying to get my mind around, how big a cost that is. And anyone who can speak to that, I'd be grateful to hear from. Are there a lot of state reps who are moderators? Are there a lot of towns that would suffer if we disallowed state reps / moderators from participating in the administration of an election? How big is this cost? And I know no one may be able to answer it, but that's what I'm trying to wrap my mind around as I'm weighing the cost and the benefit.
I see that Deputy Scanlon is still online with us, and I guess if he would be willing, I'd like him to answer as to your office. How often has this issue been raised by members of the public with concern for the issues you're hearing us discuss?
Madam Chair, every election we hear from voters about local election officials working the polls, sometimes when they're running for the same office, but certainly when they're running for an office other than an election official. And, people feel different ways about that. And there are perception issues that are involved. And, when we train local election officials, we do everything we can to make them aware of those potential perception issues that might be out there while they're doing their job. And as has been discussed by the committee, this has been a subject, not just this year, but, as Representative Bergeron said, for decades. And obviously there's been no resolution to, how to easily address the concerns. The one thought I guess I would convey to the committee is that these individuals that are serving as moderators or supervisors of the checklist that hold other positions, and there are a number of state reps that are also moderators currently, is that they are elected by the people in their town or in their ward. And those positions are usually ones that command respect. The officials are chosen based on their integrity and honesty and the voters' decision that they're capable of doing the job. And every example that I can think of that where a current state rep also serves as a moderator, I think they're all excellent examples of individuals that are able to separate, running for an office, but also doing their job as an election official. And even though there's, this issue comes up, every biennium, we seem to get through it. And, I'm not aware of any real scandals that are out there that I can cite as examples of, this process going awry because of conflicts. Beyond that, I don't have any answers on, how to cleanly address this issue either.
Representative Hamer, do you have your hand up? Or do I have my cursor over your screen? I have my cursor over your screen. Any other questions? Yeah, I don't. Okay. I think we understand the issue, and it's an issue. Representative Muirhead.
Well, I just would propose for people to consider that if it really is a vexing question, and it's been dogging people, for our esteemed colleague Representative Bergeron for 5 decades, maybe rather than pass the bill in its current state, we should take this one part of it and study it just a little bit longer and get a sense of how many people are talking about, how many towns will be affected, and just get a more precise understanding of what the effects of this would be for towns in the state. And I'm not sure that's the right course. I'm just tossing it out there.
All right, I just thank you for raising that, because it brings up 2 points that are my understanding of dealing with these omnibus bills. Just so you know, we cannot separate the parts out. They remain in the final vote on what will be SB 83, now amended by the Senate, possibly amended by the House. So if you're considering, say, part 1 is a study, it needs to be contained an amendment within the bill and cannot be retained or dealt with separately. It is part of the whole package, which is part of why I wanted to have this work session, so that people understood when amendments come forward, you're dealing with that part, and you can make a motion to amend the bill to delete a part. So you understand that's valid. So you can delete, amend, or leave a part in. We can't create a new bill. Representative Cody.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say you've had a good historical overview of the current state of the situation regarding this question, which has been a question, as Representative Bergeron pointed out, for longer than I've been around. I've always been one that's come down on the side of, that you have to pick your poison in terms of, you either want to run for state rep or you want to do moderator. I concede that Representative Bergeron and others have raised significant question about the utility of that in these circumstances. But, obviously, if this were not a live issue, it wouldn't be here. But the only thing I could say about it is I have no answers any more than anyone else has. However, at some point you have to fish or cut bait, as my grandfather used to say. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any other committee comments on part 1?
Madam Chair.
We are on SB 83. Representative Groen.
Yeah, regarding Representative Muirhead's suggestion, could there be an amendment just to make section 1 a study instead of making the actual changes?
It can, but I think my reply is, how many times do you study an issue? It sounds like this has been studied, maybe not by virtue of a formal separate committee, but it's certainly been discussed a lot. And I think Representative Cody makes a valid point. Maybe some people just have to make a decision. I know in my community, the moderator has always just been the moderator. And we've had about 3 moderators since the beginning of time. And maybe that has something to do with how that election goes and that he's handling ballots. In my community, once you become moderator, you're there till you don't want to run anymore or God has other plans for you. So, and I know a lot of the communities around me are like that. So, you know, committee members can bring what amendments they want forward, but I just want everybody to understand what the implications are. Representative Terosian, further comment?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. No, I concur with what you were just saying. I mentioned one of my towns having the assistant moderator and the moderator, both state reps. In my town, my current moderator was a state rep, but he takes very seriously his job as moderator to be completely impartial, to the point where he was a registered Republican. He no longer associates with a party. He goes out of his way to make sure there's no indication or potential for there to be a conflict of interest. And so certainly, you know, people make that choice. Maybe that's the solution with a future legislation, to come up with a way to maybe perhaps have that kind of restriction. But it's getting back to part one. It seems to me the best thing we could do with that is to ITL that portion of the bill in its current form. It's just my opinion at this point.
All right, I assume you're talking about part 1 of Representative Freitas. Yeah, okay.
It's been my experience that the experience of the moderator is what keeps this election running smoothly and legally. And I think it's rare. I don't know. No, somebody said there were 2 representatives that are. In my ward, I would prefer that to be what it is, that the moderator who is running for another position cannot touch. In fact, that happens. I cannot touch the ballots when they're counting them. So this, I would leave it as it is. Thank you.
Are you disclosing that you're a moderator?
No, I'm not a moderator. I don't think I want to be
Oh,
one.
okay.
No, when and because we have one that is so good, he's so experienced, why would I want to lose that because he's running for something? And how many days does the moderator serve in that role as compared to a representative? I just need a good moderator, and I have one, not me.
All right, well, so anything we pass will be except for the good moderator in Representative Freitas's district. All right, anything else on part 1? All right, part 2 of SB 83 is in regards to the establishment of an election information portal. There were a fair amount of discussion on this. There was some question as to whether or not there should have been a fiscal note associated with it. The end goal bill was that a information portal would be in place by January 1st of next year. Representative Terosian.
Thanks again, Madam Chair. Yes, and this was the one I was speaking to before when we were on the one of the other bills,
The early,
because I thought we had
yeah.
gone further ahead. And so, in you heard Deputy Scanlon say that that there was some concern on the date. The prime sponsor in this did indicate that he wouldn't have a problem if we chose to push the dates out. And I think almost certainly if we had interest in passing that, we would have to do that. But I believe I may have been one that asked the question about the fiscal note on that, or what the cost would be. And that was a concern as well. So those are the 2 issues I see with that. I don't disagree in concept with the idea, but whether or not as it's drafted, we can get there on this, I'm not sure. Thank you.
Other comments?
Madam Chair.
Representative Terosian, did you want to add something?
No, I was trying to, I tried to lower my hand. I might have hit it twice. No, I'm all set.
All right. Representative Groen, did you have something?
Yeah, could Deputy Scanlon comment on what an appropriate date would be?
He could. The question is, will he? Deputy
think-
Scanlon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that it is too optimistic to think that we might have a portal like this in place for the 22 election cycle, but it's something that I think is certainly doable for 2024. So, if that's the time frame that the committee would want to look at, I think that's certainly something that we could make happen.
Further questions from committee members? Deputy Scanlon, I guess I have a question for you. There was some question about whether who would actually be doing this. At least in my mind, I have some notes to that effect. This directs that your office with the Department of Information Technology there's some financial implications of this, I would presume. And was there some other department that maybe should have or would be involved in this, as I recall? Deputy Scanlon.
Technology.
The language in the bill suggests that we work with the Department of Information Technology when we're designing the portal. And, that's something we'd certainly be happy to do. Typically, when there's a IT project, I'll call it, we establish the parameters of what's going to be requested, put it in the form of an RFP, and then have some vendors, submit their proposals on making the implementation of it happen. And to do that, obviously, we have to rely on some expertise of IT professionals, which would be DOIT in this case. And that leads then to the question of the fiscal note. Once we do that, we get bids in, we have a better handle of how much this is actually going to cost based on what we want the portal to do.
Does anybody know whether the current General House website has what we would consider a true portal on it? Because from what I know, these are pretty much static pages that provide links to documents or other sites.
I think
Okay.
that's
I just didn't know
accurate. I
whether
don't
anybody
think
knew.
I don't believe we do have anything like a portal on the general court website.
Yeah, I don't think we do either. And I raise that just because I know for other reasons, I'm looking at websites and I know what our staffing is and our current technology as compared to what other places might have in regards to portals and information and staff. Because I'll tell you right now, we don't have it. So I have a major concern with this. And then when we put in a date of the end of next session, not that I think this section would be undone, but I'm not sure that that's a practice I want to get into, because in 2 years from now, and I don't think this is an issue that it would be, the next session could come in and say, be gone. And now you've directed people on a path that maybe internally, if they had just done, would still be in place, but by statute, we could potentially halt. Any other comments on this section? All right. Well, it sounds like there's not general opposition to it, but there is some general about the implementation and the date. Okay. Section 3 of SB 83, or Part 3, has to do with recount fees. It was pretty straightforward. It was presented by Senator Gray. Questions or comments? Representative Lane?
Yeah, sorry, I can't figure out how to raise my hand. My comment was, and maybe it's just, it's going to cost a senator more to do a recount than they're going to make during their term, and it's going to count, and it's going to cost state rep almost the same amount. I don't know, it just kind of hit me wrong, but I guess that's the price of, it just seems, I don't know, odd.
Are you talking about section 3 with the state senator and state representative?
Yes, yeah. Section 3 and section 4. But, and I was just, it just seemed incongruent. I mean, we're basically public servants. We're making $100 a year. It just, I don't know, seemed odd, but.
Representative Barry?
I actually had the opposite feeling. I wish they were higher. I think a lot of I've participated in a lot of recounts in the state, probably over 15 at this point, including municipal recounts, which are covered by this. But
Right.
Usually, I probably say in my personal experience, probably 70% of the recounts I've participated in are grossly unnecessary. Rarely ever, with Wyndham excluded, the current situation, Wyndham excluded, do the results change? And a lot of times these are feel-good exercises for the losing candidate. And by the way, I've worked for both the winning and the losing candidate, so I understand what it's like to be on both sides of that. I hear you about the state reps and the state senators. I look more of the concern with the statewide and congressional districts, and the cost associated with those. The Secretary of State's office does an excellent job on these recounts. They spend a lot of money and staff on these recounts. And one of these days, we will have a statewide recount, and I have no idea what the cost will be, but it will be high. In 2016, the U.S. Senate race was decided by a little more than 1,000 votes. And that would have been a perfectly reasonable recount to ask for, given the margin, right? So I guess, I don't know, I raise all that to say I'm kind of on the other side of that, but I have no intention of changing it. But if somebody does change it to be higher, you have my vote.
Representative Rosian.
Thank you. Thanks again, Madam Chair. Yeah, I was going to comment, Representative Berry kind of hit on it, that, I mean, if you look at the old fee schedule, if you want to call it that, what a rep paid was less for a recount than a state Senate race. So it's always been that way. And I to add to what Representative Berry said, his concern is a statewide and congressional. So, maybe a solution to that, if people are concerned about, you leave the fee the same for the House and state Senate, maybe even executive council, and then the rest, you do the increase. I don't really have heartburn either way, other than I'm typically, people that know me know I'm more often than not, I vote against things that are fee increases, because that's just the way I am. But, and I don't know what the cost of what it costs to do a recount. I know there's a lot of volunteers. If we're woefully behind the cost, then we should increase it. So that's my comment.
Again, this was another section of the bill that there was no fiscal note. We're already doing it, so I'm assuming the response would have been no discernible change. Representative Groen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Representative Berry on this. I think even with the raised fees, I'm sure that even with the increased fees, it comes nowhere near the cost of the recount. The point here, it seems, is to the greater the margin, the higher the cost, to discourage people from doing a asking for a recount if there's a larger margin. And I think the numbers are very reasonable. With the state rep candidate, I agree that it's a low paid position, but I can't imagine very many state reps spending less than 10 or 20 times these amounts on their campaign. So I don't think the amount, if they really want to recount, would prevent them from doing it, but it would help to discourage spurious recounts.
Representative Barry.
I just wanted to add one more point about the state rep recount. Not all state rep recounts are created equal. Some districts are heads up. We're talking about less than 1,000 voters, maybe 1,200 voters. In my district, I have one of the largest flotorial seats in terms of population in the state. I've got about, I think, 18,000 registered voters. So those recounts are different. A recount in Derry, where I believe there's over 8 reps in Derry now. Those multi-candidate recounts get really, really labor intensive because you're having to count. You're not just recounting the last winner and the first loser, right? You're recounting everything in there. So those state rep recounts can be a little sneaky.
Thank you. Further comments? Okay. Somebody wants to make amendments. It sounds like in general, there's not overwhelming opposition, and there might be some appetite for changing some of the fees. So make your amendments appropriately if you're going to. Part 4 of SB 83 is relative to the itemized statements filed by political committees and candidates. This had to do with standardizing what was used to submit to the Secretary of State. And Ross Berry was close to my heart on this in regards to saying that even font size 8 was not big enough. It should be 12. So other comments from committee members? Representative Berry.
To that, Madam Chairman, I did send an amendment over to you from OLS. I do have the fabled 8-point font to 12-point font amendment from OLS ready to go. It's my intention with that amendment that if we edit this omnibus bill, that I'll present it. If we don't, for some reason, edit this omnibus bill, which I think is an unlikely situation, I'll just sit on it. I don't want to have to needlessly send this bill back to the Senate if we're not already making edits to it.
Thank you. Representative Terosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm one that, and I'm not alone. I'm more of a grassroots guy, and I don't have a team when I run for state rep, and I suspect there's a lot of others. And I do file my reports. Oftentimes I even fax them, and they're handwritten, but you can read them. And I don't want, it's problematic to me. It's just one more thing I have to do. And others like me, now I have to, spend more time filing these things if I have to have them all formatted on a computer. And I'll go on record as being the dumbest guy when it comes to computers in the room. And so that, the rest of them I'm fine with. It should be legible, but I don't want to be forced to have to do more work on these things, because what I do submit is legible. And they're handwritten, and I do it myself. That's all.
So let other members of the committee correct me. I understand this is a may, that if you're doing it electronically, you have to do it in a manner that's legible, that was the intent. It wasn't to force you to file it electronically if you didn't want to. So Deputy Scanlon, you're on the line. Could you chime in as to whether that's your understanding of this bill or not?
Yes, Madam Chair, my understanding is just to make the forms legible.
But if people are doing handwritten, they can continue to do that.
That's my understanding. Just want to make sure that
Thank you.
If they are handwritten, that they are also legible.
Well, thank you for the clarification, because I thought I heard in testimony that this would force everybody to have to do them electronically. Perhaps I'm on a misnomer there.
Yeah, that was not my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else on part 4?
Yes, hi. This is,
Representative Quayle.
yes, Representative Terozzi, I just wanted to point out that it's explicit on line 22, page 4 for part 4, that a candidate, the political committee of a candidate or a candidate may file such candidate's required reports as an email attachment, a facsimile, or a paper copy. So I think that makes it very clear that you can continue to file on paper.
Okay, so,
The new section, the new
Thank-
section on line 28 just says legibility is required. Thank you, Madam
Further
Chair.
comments on part 4? Thank you, Representative Quayle. I'm not seeing any. So
Madam
that sounds
Chair,
like that.
I'm sorry, Madam
Representative
Chair.
Lane,
Sorry.
go ahead. Sorry, I
go
need to
back-
look for your wave.
I did it physically, not virtually. To Representative Quayle's point, the way I read that though is even with the paper copy, it says provided that the font size still would be required, correct? But most people are going to write big point, but so I think Roman numeral 1 would still apply, but Roman numeral 2 and 3 probably wouldn't. Is that a correct reading? Is that how you would read that?
That's my understanding. I didn't particularly, I don't think that the facsimile or paper copy, I think you can print out on the form and that would technically be electronic, but I understood that, I think I recall in testimony that, you know, some of the filings, they would make the font size purposely small so that you couldn't read it as printed, and then you would have to go to another, you know, medium. So I understood that you could still do them handwritten, and this really
Okay.
dealt with, if you look at the title of 6, here I am with my glasses and font size, 664 9A, it specifically deals with the filed electronically.
Right.
And then so I sort of saw it differently. Representative Barry.
Yeah, I'm looking at line 23. It says printed. So would there be this is a good question for all of our lawyers present, our attorneys. Is there a difference between printed and written? I'm asking genuinely. I don't know. This one's well beyond me.
I don't know.
There probably
Anybody
is. I
else
just
wanna
don't know
try?
what it is.
If somebody can handwrite in 8-point font, that's, you know what, at that point, they should be able to send it in.
Yeah.
Well, I would assume that written refers to graphologically and printed refers to printed.
That would be my belief, but you know, I've been wrong before.
It also says on line 31 that the candidate shall be responsible for ensuring the report is legible.
Yeah.
And it gives the Secretary of State or Attorney General's office, to me, the discretion to inform the candidate if it is not legible.
Yeah.
Right.
I
It's
think,
about, this gives them a little teeth. Yeah.
I think reasonable people
get
know
over.
when something is legible or not.
Now we're talking politics and craziness. Representative Sandler.
Yes, ma'am. I'm going to take off my former lawyer hat here and just use a obsessive wordsmith interpretation. But legible
Okay.
means legible. Someone's handwriting might be more legible than someone else's printing, and more legible than certain small fonts that we get off of our computers or a typewriter or what have you. The operative term is legible. If it isn't legible, everything else falls by the wayside. That would be my opinion.
All right. We're putting that in the record, Representative Sandler. We're not taking many notes today, but that's going in. All right, anybody else on part 4? All right, I'm not seeing anything, so we'll move on to part 5. This is the last section. Is there a part? Yeah, there is a part. Yeah.
There is.
Oh,
Gonna-
yeah. Part 4 in regards to optional town meeting procedures. This dealt with the Representative Sandler, you're back on deck. The prior years versus the prior years. And I see that Cordell Johnstone from the NHMA is also with us, who had commented on this before. So I'm going to defer to committee members as to whether that needs anything or not. Anybody think that needs a change? Representative Sandler, thank you.
Okay.
You're muted, Representative Sandler. I need you to unmute, Representative Sandler. Great, thank
I'm
you. Now
unmuted.
you're on.
Thank you. Was the question whether we were talking about, are we still on the legibility of this?
No. We're on now we're on the next section, which had to do with the issue of a community being able to expend funds before that fiscal year's budget is approved. And it's supposed to be at a level that is considered to be reasonable in light of prior year's budgets. And the issue came up in the word, I raised it, I was the pain, and I think I was corrected as to the intent by Cordell Johnstone. In regards to years on line 5, year apostrophe S as compared to years with the plural apostrophe.
Okay. Years would be the plural. You're right. If it's being compared to a series of 2 or 4 or 8 or however many previous years, you would probably want to go back to those years and determine what percentage of the votes were affected by it. If it says apostrophe S, that means we're talking about a particular year and its ownership of the question that's going on there. So we could talk about last year's budget.
Thank you.
Or prior years, plural, where we would have to probably go back and do some kind of a statistical analysis.
Right. And my concern is because this issue is generally raised by people who are very suspicious of what their municipal leaders are doing in expenditures. And my concern is, and Cordell, I hope you're on, when you said prior years, to me, that left it wide open to any prior year. And so if you had big spending 5 years ago, but the prior year had been pretty lean, you could argue that a higher expenditure level until the budget was approved was consistent with a prior year budget 5 years ago. So I had thought that if you were going to make it, if you were going to make a change, it should have been the prior fiscal year's appropriations, not prior years. So let me open that up to comment. Representative Groen.
I felt the same way, Madam Chair. And I think if we took out the years where it's located and we read this in light of prior appropriations and expenditures for the same purposes during the same period of the immediately prior fiscal period. And that would, if the fiscal period is more than 1 year, it would take care of that, but it would clearly relate to the immediately prior fiscal period.
I see that Mr. Johnstone from the Municipal Association is with us. I've asked him if he can unmute. If you want to comment, please.
Yeah, hi, and thank you for inviting me. My point is simply that the language ought to be clarified because on line 5, it says, the current law says, in light of prior year apostrophe S. And you need, I think it needs to be clear that we're referring to just the last year, singular, or we're referring to a series of prior years, plural. And the way it's written right now, it's unclear because it says prior year apostrophe S. If you want to refer to just one year, you should say the prior year apostrophe S. If you want to refer to several, you should say prior years S apostrophe. So if you don't like changing year apostrophe S to years S apostrophe, then I think what you want to do is insert the word the before prior in light of the prior year apostrophe S. So it's clear that you're just referring to last year.
Would it, Cordell, if I could speak up and ask this question, school, in my town, my fiscal year corresponds to a calendar year. So there's no question about what you would be referring to for a year. Our school district encompasses 2 calendar years, but is 1 fiscal year. Makes sense to have the word fiscal associated with year as suggested by Representative Groen?
I think it's fine to include the word fiscal. And in fact, the language that he suggested, I don't remember it exactly, but it sounded fine to me. My point is just simply clarify whether you're referring to 1 year, 1 fiscal year, or several fiscal years. And I don't think I have a strong opinion as to which it should be. It just ought to be clear one way or the other. So if you wanted to say in light of the prior fiscal year apostrophe S, I think that would be fine. That would clarify it.
Thank you. Representative Terosian.
Thank you. I had a question for Mr. Johnson, if I may. So I guess one of the questions was, what was the intent? Just the prior year, or to be several prior years or years? That was number one. Number two, the beginning of the fiscal year, are there some towns or cities that start their fiscal year prior to January 1st?
Yeah, there are. Most of the towns are on a calendar fiscal year, but there are a handful that have a July 1 to June 30 fiscal year.
Okay, so as a follow-up, the idea, this is to address those towns that started their say the 2021 budget prior to January of 2021 then. That's the reason.
Well, the main reason, if you forget about the change on line 5, the main reason for the change on lines 3 and 4 is to extend the benefit that is currently available only to towns with a calendar fiscal year, to extend that to those that have a June 30 fiscal year as well. Because what happened last year, and it was very unusual, obviously, but because of the pandemic, there were some towns with a June 30 fiscal year that had to postpone their town meeting until July or August. So they were adopting their budget after the fiscal year begins, which they don't ordinarily do. Towns that are on a calendar fiscal year always adopt their budget after the fiscal year begins. The fiscal year begins January 1, but we have our town meeting in March. So
right. And the couple, so yeah, and the couple of towns that I can think of that have a meeting later than March have their fiscal year beginning July 1.
Yes.
So up until last year, this was not an issue. So this would clarify it.
Correct.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Madam Chair, I have a question just procedurally.
Sure.
So what would happen in a town, and forgive me, I have never lived in a town, I've lived in a city. What would happen in a town where you did want to make a significant increase in a portion of the budget? How would you go about doing that?
You need to do it as part of your budget. This is So if, Cordell, I'm jumping in here, correct me if I'm wrong. As a former selectman, I might have decide that I want to spend 10 times more than I did last year on my road plan. Okay. Everybody wants a new road, and I decide I ran on new roads. I'm going to give everybody a new road. My budget would have a huge increase in my public works budget for that plan. What this would mean is if the prior year I wasn't spending at 10 times the rate, right? I'm proposing the increase. I can only spend at the rate of the prior year until the voters go and approve the increase. And then whenever my meeting is, then I can go out and order my asphalt and spend at that rate. And if they don't approve it, I've kept myself at the prior year's level. So I'm not running into a budget disaster by doing a huge expenditure and then having the voters say, hey, we're not going to give you that increase.
Thank you.
Cordell, did I get that?
Yes, that's right. If you want, basically, you need to be careful about your expenditures between January 1 and the town meeting. And as the law says, be consistent with the prior year's expenditures. If you want to increase something tenfold, you very well better wait until town meeting when the voters approve the budget, and then you can spend whatever they approve.
Representative Hamblett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also think it's important to put the word immediate in there if you're really referring to the immediate past year. Somebody else brought that up, I think Representative Sandler. Is that
Right,
not correct?
with years. So I'm hoping that Representative Groen has volunteered to do an amendment along the lines of the words that he suggested. I think it was he.
I will volunteer to do
Representative
that amendment.
Quayle. Okay, Representative Quayle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I agree that clarification is really needed, and I think the introduction of the word fiscal is really important here. And it is needed for the towns that have their fiscal year begin July 1st. And I thought Representative Groen's amendment did a good job of clarifying. And it's important to clarify it because it needs to be clear. Otherwise, I'm also a former selectman. I did one term here in Ringe, and things need to be very clear, or the possibility for conflict and dissension rises very quickly. So this fix needs to be done. Thank you.
All right, anybody else on part 5 of SB 83? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. So we're going to move on to the last bill for work session, the last Senate bill for consideration by this committee. That would be SB 89. SB 89 had a public hearing on April 23rd. This is a bill of omnibus legislation relating to the city chief election officer, dealing with photographs within the guardrail, allowing processing of absentee ballots, establishing a committee, and the duties of the registrar of probate. Representative Bergeron, when we get to the part that you have an amendment, can you please speak up? Unmute yourself and speak up, because of the computer that I'm on, I'm not going to be able to dual screen very easily. So I'm going to need you to take the lead on that amendment. So part 1, relative to the city chief election officer. This appeared to be a change in label. The term being used as a descriptor. Committee members. Anybody? Okay, not seeing any. I'm going to move on to part 2 regarding taking of photographs within the guardrail. I think we sort of discussed what the purpose and function of this one. This is separate from taking a picture of your own ballot. Any questions or comments? I'm not seeing any. Part 3, in regards to the pre-processing of absentee ballots. Comments, questions?
That's
This is like the
section
calm
I
before the
amended,
storm. Okay,
Madam Chair.
Representative Bergeron, why don't you go ahead with your amendment?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. The intent, as I understand it from the sponsor, in part was to allow for cities and towns to be able to reach out to voters who were voting absentee, whose paperwork or affidavits weren't filled out properly, and give them an opportunity to correct those errors prior to the ballots being counted on election day. And that's a concept I think I would hope that all of us support to try and make it work. It was the approach to it, the logistics of it, that I had some concerns about. There seemed to be some conflicting language in the original Senate Bill 89 as amended. For example, it was in one section, it was saying that if someone was voting in person, the clerk could take a look at the affidavit and make sure it was filled out properly. But at the same time, it was saying in that section that the clerk had to have a policy providing a 24-hour notice that this be done. It also provided that at 5 o'clock the day after the day before an election, that the moderator would be processing these absentee ballot applications, and presumably to find errors that occurred in the affidavits, and then the clerk would have to contact these people to try and correct the paperwork. Of course, the problem with that is the night before an election, the election officials are probably trying to set up their polling places. And, in practice, once the office is closed on that Monday night, there's no one going to be, even if the clerk can reach out to these people, there's not going to be anyone there to accept the correction. And if we're telling them to go to the polls on election day to vote in person the next day, again, you have the problem, well, they're voting absentee because they can't go to the polls. And so the amendment that I was proposing kind of took a look at what we did during the COVID experiences last fall, which would allow the moderator to do the pre-processing on certain days after the checklist has been certified by the supervisors of the checklist. It eliminated the night before, which is Monday, because now the purpose is to try and find out where there have been errors that have occurred. It still directs the town or city clerk to try and reach out to these people to see if we can get their paperwork corrected. It also adds the word affidavit, envelope, and application, because sometimes it's not just the envelope that's a problem, it might be the application itself. So we're asking the moderator to look at both of those. It's focusing on the moderator doing this because under state law, it's the moderator who ultimately has to make the decision as to whether or not a voter's paperwork has been properly executed and the vote should be counted. So even if the clerk was doing a lot of preliminary work, ultimately the moderator has to go through all of those envelopes and make sure that the paperwork has been properly executed. The other provision I put in there is, and Representative Hamlin as well, is to say that if the moderator want to hold sessions prior to the certification of the checklist, they could do so. They just couldn't mark up the checklist until that session that occurs after, which is mandatory, that occurs after the checklist has been posted. I think I've covered about the key things. I mean, I try to preserve the intent of Senator Gray's proposal and try and resolve some of the logistical problems I saw with it, using as a model what was done with House Bill 1266. I'd like to think that we were able to accomplish that. And I guess if other committee members have any questions or input on this approach, I would certainly be happy to try and answer those.
Committee members, is Representative Mooney in LOB? Because I know she had a conversation with her clerk, and I wondered if she was available to share it.
Madam
I
Chair,
don't, okay, I'm not,
hear me okay? I'm probably not.
yes, we can.
Okay. Yes, I was contacted by my town's moderator. She did have 3 very specific issues with regard to the bill, and I think that frankly, Representative Bergeron's amendment covers a couple of them. I'd like to really get them verbatim, so could you just give me one moment to look for them?
Sure. In the meantime, Representative Terosian, did you have a comment on this section?
Yes, we heard in testimony on page 2, I guess, of this section, line 17, the town and city clerks or the designee shall open out envelopes of all absentee ballots received prior to 5 p.m. on the day prior to election day. We heard testimony from some town clerks. One in particular was the town clerk from Derry, who had a concern with that being required that it shall, and that the word may be better in that regard. And so I didn't know if Representative Bergeron's amendment would address that section or not.
If I may respond, Madam Chair.
Sure, Representative Bergeron.
I had that question of Senator Gray during his testimony. I said, was it your intent to make this mandatory for all elections? And he said, yes. So I kept in the language shall. And what I did in my amendment is that, say, after the checklist has been posted or certified by the supervisors of the checklist, the moderators shall hold a session to review these, open the outer envelopes and review the affidavits. And I mean, as I understood it, his intent was to ensure that election officials would try and make corrections to any of the paperwork that voters may have inadvertently made errors to allow their votes to be cast on election day. So I didn't change the sponsor's intent.
Thank you. Representative Mooney, do you have your notes?
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the first one is to allow but not require pre-processing. I don't know if it's point Representative Bergeron wants to.
And that's in line with what Representative Terosian just brought up. Okay.
Number 2 is to allow processing during the Thursday through Saturday prior to election, not Monday. And I see that very clearly in the Bergeron Hamlet amendment, page 1, 16 through 19.
Yep.
And then issue 3, allow challengers during pre-processing, but not at the polls.
Madam Chair, yeah, my amendment did not address the issue of challenging. Challenges occur actually at the polls as the voter's name is being announced. And that would continue to be the practice even with those absentee ballots that were pre-processed. Based on, again, what I think Senator Gray's intent was, I tried to preserve that intent in the amendment.
Representative Bergeron, and I apologize for not being able to see your amendment. There was a comment during our public hearing on the second page of the bill of the part, page 3, I think, line 21, about the moderator shall then mark the checklist. And there was suggestion that that be changed to the moderator or the moderator's designee. Does anybody recall that or think it's material if this section of the bill is going to be changed?
I think I did say throughout my amendment, the moderator or the moderator's designee.
Okay, great.
Certainly
Thank you.
does in the pre-processing of absentee ballots. And if I may add, during the public hearing, one of the members of the committee asked, how many people are we really talking about in trying to reach out who may not have filled out the affidavits or the paperwork properly? My best guess based on experience is that that is less than half of 1% of the absentee ballots received. The real workload is the opening and the reviewing of all the absentee ballots, not necessarily contacting the voters who made errors.
Thank you, Representative Groen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Representative Bergeron, if he's willing to take it.
Sure, go ahead.
Do I understand that your amendment would establish certain days and possibly times for the pre-processing as opposed to sort of an open notice process?
Yes, the pre-processing, the mandatory session should not occur until the supervisors of the checklist have certified the checklist for use at the election. And that usually will occur 7 to 10 days before the date of the election. I looked at the dates, actually, the days selected for House Bill 1266, which was the COVID bill dealing with pre-processing of absentee ballots. It specifically said Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Monday. So in modeling that language, I included the words Thursday, Friday, or Saturday prior to the time established for the date of the election. So yes, there are specific days. It really doesn't matter, I suppose, as long as it occurs after the checklist has been posted.
Follow up?
Go ahead, Representative Groen.
One of the concerns that I have with probably the main concern with the pre-processing is that when a notice is given, that notice, unless somebody is necessarily really watching for it, they may not see it. Election day is always the same Tuesday, and people know that. And I'm wondering if we could specify a certain, like on, say, Thursday and Friday at 10 o'clock, that 10 o'clock and following, that this would be done so that we establish a very definitive time that is the same in all towns and cities, that people then know, okay, this is when the pre-processing is going to be done, and it becomes a habit as opposed to something that can be announced and changed by every town and in any situation.
If, with permission, let me chime in on that one. I do sort of like that, but I will tell you that the last September election that occurred after Labor Day, the Tuesday after Labor Day, if you recall, the primary, we were setting up actually the Thursday night and Friday before the election, because that's when we had staff available and could do it. And of course, school wasn't really in session. So that's I will tell you, that's sort of my concern. One of the things about doing these is your clerk / moderator's ability to find volunteers to come in and do this process. And if we handicap, I don't want to say handicap, if we limit it to a particular day, you may end up with communities that just say, we might like to do it, but I can't get enough volunteers that day, or my moderator's not available, or, but I agree that there needs to be some parameters on when it occurs.
If I may, Madam Chair, just to add,
Yeah.
House Bill 1266 modeled some of what was in House Bill 556, which I sponsored last session to allow for pre-processing of ballots. And during all the discussions and committee public hearings, some of the issues you raised actually were discussed, that there should be specific days identified. Thursday and Friday became two of those days that were identified. And then Saturday was added because one of the senators felt, well, maybe this should be done at the polling sites. And since so many polling sites are in the schools, it couldn't be done during while school was in session, and therefore they threw in the Saturday. So there was some consideration given to try and identify a very limited number of days when that could occur. I don't know if there's really a perfect solution for all communities, as Representative Griffin kind of alluded to.
Representative Hamblett.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I just wanted to reiterate that when the clerk, I mean, it worked really well in the last election in the COVID election. So that when the clerk announces the date of the pre-processing, he or she also has to announce the time. So the clerk makes that very clear that, you know, there's a date and time of when the pre-processing will occur and the location where it will occur. So I don't think that needs to be a statewide, specific rule, but the town clerks do know that they have to make it very clear that the date, time, and place of where the pre-processing will occur.
Thank you. Representative Groen.
One other question on this, a concern, and that is that if we introduce may versus shall, and some towns do go through the pre-processing and allow voters to correct their application, and other towns choose not to, then are we going to run into a situation of that voters in those in the first group of towns will have an advantage over those in the other towns, and is the court going to accept that?
If I may, I think that is a point that was raised, and one of the reasons is Senator Gray used the word shall in his language.
Representative Terosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since that got brought up about there being an inconsistency, this bill, or this part of the bill, has that built in that, in essence, it rewards voters who vote early that have a chance to have the information corrected, when those that don't, on their absentee ballots, come in after that date, they don't have the advantage of having their missing signature and incorrect name and so forth verified. So we already have that problem as the bill's written, in my opinion.
Representative Berry.
Yes, to build on what Representative Terosian said, I think there's a big equal protection issue here, specifically for those ballots that come in late. Where the COVID-19 election 2020 is getting referenced a lot, in which there was a surge of absentee ballots. You can most certainly make the argument that when a third of the electorate was voting with absentee ballots, that this was necessary. But I don't think going into 2022 that we're going to see that sort of turnout again and that sort of reliance on absentee ballots. I also have serious trepidations about moving Election Day away from Election Day. That has been a New Hampshire tradition going back over 100 years, that Election Day happens on Election Day. And we're not trying to stop anybody from voting with an absentee. That's their right. Certain people are not available at the polls on that day and they have to cast an absentee ballot. But we need to treat everybody equally. We need to treat everybody the same. And I believe we need to make sure that we're keeping with the New Hampshire tradition of voting on Election Day when possible. And that's why I'm a big believer in as much election activity needs to happen on Election Day as is possible. I think in the future, we are going to have electronic poll books. I think those are going to be commonplace if we pass this previous bill, probably in 6 years. That's going to dramatically reduce the amount of staff or volunteers that are needed on Election Day, because the lines are going to be much shorter. There's not going to be A through D anymore. There's going to be 4 lines. You walk up, you go to whatever one's open, and you vote. So I think we're moving towards addressing a lot of the problems that pre-processing is attempting to deal with already. And I think we're kind of moving away from that traditional New Hampshire experience of voting on Election Day when possible.
Thank you. Other comments from members? So Representative Bergeron has his amendment. The committee members have it. If people have further changes or other amendments they want to do, I would suggest either working off of Representative Bergeron's amendment with his amendment or doing a separate amendment. Okay. The next section of, anything else on that section? All right, the next section of SB 89 is part 4, which has to do with the committee to study post-election audit counting devices and some recount discrepancy authorization investigation to the Attorney General's office. Comments from committee members. Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My comments pertain specifically to the first section of part 4, which is on page 3, starting with line 27, establishing a committee to study post-election audit counting devices. Last session, Senate Bill 283 required that the Secretary of State conduct a study of high-speed optical scan ballot counting devices to assess the feasibility of using such equipment in a post-election audit. That report was due November 1st, but given the challenges posed during the last fall election by COVID and a lot of the preparations the Secretary of State had to make to address those issues at the polls, it wasn't released until March 23rd. Senator Gray's bill was actually introduced on January 26th, prior to the Secretary of State's report. And looking at this section, I think basically Senator Gray is asking to establish a special committee to do what the Secretary of State has already done. So I'm not so sure there's value in creating that committee at this time. We have retained Representative Lang's bill in our committee to address the issues of post-election audits. I'm thinking that perhaps that's really all we need. We don't need to establish another committee to do the work that was done last session with Senate Bill 283, which, by the way, was also Senator Gray's bill.
Other comments on this part, or Representative Bergeron's comments that I think were terrific? Representative Terosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and question to Representative Bergeron. That Senate bill he referenced that the study's been completed, was that a similar type committee? By that I mean, did it have a couple members of the Senate, 3 members from the House, and so forth, or was it a standard study commission as this proposes to do?
No, it wasn't a study committee. It simply directed the Secretary of State to conduct a study as to the feasibility of using these devices as post-election audits. So the Secretary of State was charged with finding vendors to do it, to conduct the studies, to use ballots from previous elections to see what kinds of results they were. I'd be happy to forward a copy of that report, the Secretary of State's report, to all members of the committee so that you could see what it entails. It's a 44-page report, but 37 of the pages are the vendors' data, which are attached to Deputy Scanlon's commentary.
I'd love to get a copy. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you for emailing that to committee members. There was a request for vendors to come and do a trial run. The Secretary of State conducted it up at the State Archives. There were 2 vendors, I think, that were able to come. Another vendor was unable to attend. It occurred last fall. Whereas has been referenced, there were a lot of competing interests going on for these vendors that have these machines. I had the opportunity to be there for part of it. It was pretty impressive to watch ballots which were put in huge stacks into high-speed readers and how fast they were processed, and that the machines could pick up questions that were then pulled out, which allowed them, whoever the decision maker would have been, to sit at a machine and actually look electronically at the ballot to make a determination, for example, whether the circle was adequately filled in. It was pretty impressive. So I just sort of throw that out. And that was, as Representative Bergeron said, as a result of Senator Gray's bill last session. Other questions or comments from committee members on this section? Okay.
Madam Chair.
Representative Groen.
So I agree with
ahead.
with Representative Bergeron on that section 1 of section 3, but it seems to me that section 2. and
We're on section 4.
Yeah, excuse me, section 1 of section 4.
I mean, part 4. Okay.
Yeah. So, excuse me, on section 1 of part 4, asking for a study committee, I agree on that part, that I think we should just deal with whatever we want to do with this on Representative Lang's bill. But then if you go to line 15 on page 4 and then line 35 on page 4, it seems that those are very different topics that aren't part of the study committee, if I'm reading it correctly. So those really are, it appears to me, not related to the study committee. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
And
right,
I also recall that on the line 30, where it starts on line 35, that, Madam Chair, you had some concern about the wording of the authority given to the Ballot Law Commission as being a bit broad.
Yes, I did. Thank you for pointing that out. Let's go back. Representative Groen points out that Representative Bergeron's comments in regards to the committee dealt with only section 1 of part 4. So I'm going to move on to section 2. And that section deals with recounts. And I don't show that there was much question or comment on this section. Does anybody have anything on this change? Deputy Scanlon, I believe you're still on the line. If you could speak as to the purpose and whether or not section 2 of part 4 has any concerns for the Secretary of State's office, since they are in charge of recounts.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This portion of the bill and section 4 is a reaction to what's happening with Wyndham right now, and a disparity between the count on election night and the recount. And you know, the process took place as it's doing the statute, where there was an election night count. There was a recount that showed a large disparity, which is unusual. It's not unheard of, but it's unusual. The Ballot Law Commission heard the appeal, and they ruled that, you know, that there was no change in the outcome of the election after the recount, and they declared the winners, you know, that were chosen on the night of the recount. So the question then became, well, you know, when all of the Republican candidates jump up roughly 300 votes, and the one Democrat candidate went down 99, what was the reason for that? And
Deputy Scanlon,
yes.
I didn't phrase my question well enough. For a moment, before we get to, I think, section 3, the Ballot Law Commission, I wanted to know whether the Secretary of State's office had any comment or opinion on the expansion in regards to the conduct of a recount in section 2, in regards to expanding the language, the ballots cast for such office or question, including votes cast for the candidates or question on the ballot, write-in votes, and not counted from overvotes or undervotes language. Because I don't have any notes indicating that there was really much said about this, and I'm not sure what the problem is it's trying to address.
Okay, so the law currently says that the ballots that are counted in a recount are the ballots that were cast in the election. And it's as simple as that. So when we conduct a recount, we do not count the ballots that were not used in the election. And there are some that believe that we should account for the whole universe of ballots that were sent to the town for the election, whether they were cast or not. So, I mean, it's up to the legislature to decide whether we should go through the exercise of counting ballots that were not used or not. It will require more time to do that. And we try to be as efficient as possible during the recount. So that's what that part of the bill does.
But Deputy Scanlon, if I can continue this with the committee's indulgence, this doesn't talk about ballots. This talks about votes. So this means that this would direct the Secretary of State to count votes that were legally not part of the vote count on election night.
Well, I'm looking, if you're looking at on page 4, lines 19 and 20, is that what we're talking about?
Yes, yes.
Including votes cast for the candidates or the question, write-in votes, and we count those, and not voted resulting from overvotes or undervotes. So that would be an additional requirement that we do not do now, where if, let's say, if there's a town where you elect 4 votes and the voter only cast votes for 3, then we would have to count that no vote in a no vote category. And then in addition to that, if it was vote for 4 and the voter voted for 5, we would also have to account for the fact for that 5th vote. And so there, again, that would require additional time. It's not something that we do right now. If a ballot is undercounted, we simply count the ballots that were cast. If the ballot was overvoted, we simply count that ballot as no votes being cast for any candidate.
Yeah, but it doesn't say ballot. It says votes. That's my concern. My concern here is this appears to be directing counting those votes, not those ballots. So I understand that there's a concern that whether or not there's a check as to whether the total amount of ballots that a town receives in election are the same as the amount of ballots that might come back for a recount. But to me, that's very different than votes. And my concern is that if we're directing you to count votes, overvoted, undervoted, that were not part of the tape totals plus the hand recounts, we are now having a recount with a 5th column, so to speak, total votes possibly for a candidate that were not counted legally on election day.
I understand what you're saying, Madam Chair, and I think that this language does do that.
Okay, that's all I need. That's all I
Okay.
needed to hear.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee members? All right, I will say flat out, I think that is a huge mistake. And I will either or ask somebody else to take this proposed language out, because I think raising the possibility that we're going to count at an official recount votes that were not part of the official election results creates a huge problem. I don't have an issue with ballots, and maybe after the audit is done and we have an audit report, there will be a process to do that that's clearly delineated. But I think allowing that possibility of a result without those guardrails, so to speak, is incredibly dangerous as to confidence in election results. All right, so that was section 2. Section 3, Deputy Scanlon, I think you had started to talk about, and there is language that was somewhat referred to in regards to significant and unexplained discrepancy as to what that means. And I have to tell you, I don't know that I want a bill that has anything related to the possibility of could undermine public confidence, because I think that's pretty broad too. Deputy Scanlon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just follow along the line that you were going, is that this is a reaction to what's occurring in Windham right now. And I think that it would make sense for that process to play out before we start engaging in a conversation of, what post election and recount and ballot law commission appeals processes should look like. The danger here is that, we get away from a quick finality to the election and get into a process that could be really drawn out. And, I think that, again, we should look at how the Windham situation plays out before we start changing the law relative to post-election and recount procedures.
Other members with comments on section 3 of SB 89 part 4, I think we're on. Yeah, part 4. Not seeing any, and I don't see Representative Lane's hand. So part 4 of part 4 of SB, or section 4 of part 4 of SB 89 starts on page 5 of the bill I have as printed, and it deals with the Attorney General's office with enforcement of election laws. Comment? My notes reflect that currently the authority to seal or unseal ballot boxes rests with the Secretary of State's office. That this allows the Attorney General to unseal and seal the ballot boxes. This, I guess, maybe is for the Secretary of State or other lawyers on the committee. The Attorney General's office is usually part of the enforcement arm of election laws, not the participant. And I'm wondering what impact having them physically involved in ballot sorting, counting, retaining issues does to that process. Anybody have a comment?
I don't recall hearing a lot about that prior to today. Was that? I don't have any notes specifically about that.
I agree there. I have myself highlighted the Attorney General may unseal and reseal ballot boxes, because that was apparently a flag of a concern of mine.
No, I have it marked as well, but I don't recall anybody speaking to that. Maybe they did.
I don't know. I have a circle in SOS. Representative Groen.
I do recall, I'm not sure if Senator Gray spoke about this at the hearing or if it was a discussion I had with him after the hearing, but the section 4 is an enabling section for section 3, as I understand it. If you look at line 8 through 10, it says that the authority at the end of line 8, whenever the Ballot Law Commission requests an investigation be conducted, the Attorney General may seal or unseal. And the argument was this time that the Attorney General said he did not have the authority to unseal and reseal the ballot boxes. So this was to give him the authority if the Election Law Commission said, hey, we want this looked into. It gave the Attorney General in RSA 76-C the right to do that. And I believe that's the intent, that it's really the enabling part for Section 3.
Thank you, Representative Groen. I would point out that I would argue it does not actually limit it to that. It actually gives the Attorney General, upon his or her own motion. So it is not just authorizing the Ballot Law Commission to direct the Attorney General's office to do something, which I don't know that that's a policy that we want to adopt. It allows the Attorney General to do it on their own motion. Again, I'm not sure that's a policy we want to adopt. Let me look here. Representative Terosian.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Madam Chair, that it looks to make the process we went through with Senate Bill 43. If this Wyndham problem were to crop up in the future without this part of Senate Bill 89 in place, we'd have to go through, if the House so desired, we'd have to go through the same process again to get those ballots unsealed. And this, in my opinion, looks to attempt to put in law the ability for the Attorney General's office to address this in the future if were to come up. Now, I don't know whether, if it limits or not limits. That appears to me to be the reason why that's in there, what I can tell.
That was Senator Gray's intent for my discussion with him.
That's what it looks like. Thank you.
Just to clarify, it's my understanding that the issue is ballot boxes, because there's specific statutes in regard to the retention of ballots and how that is handled. And that the Attorney General's office now, and in fact has, done books, records, paper, documentary materials. So, I mean, it's sort of a mishmash is what I would sort of say. I'm not sure. I understand the issue that came up, but I'm not sure from a policy standpoint. I want the Attorney General, whoever that might be, to have the ability to go get ballot boxes and unseal them for whatever they might think needs to be investigated, because as written, this does not require the Ballot Law Commission to do the direction.
Madam Chair, would
Anybody
you be
else?
okay with this if we eliminated or upon his or her motion?
No, probably not, because I think, to be honest with you, you're making a major change in the Ballot Law Commission's authority. And I come back to what's a significant and unexplained discrepancy. I mean, other people are not raising a major issue with this. So, I mean, that's part of having this discussion, so people can raise issues that maybe they hadn't thought about, or maybe hanging out on the limb about to fall off the branch all by themselves.
Well, there's also the issue of the discretion that language arguably grants to the Attorney General. Because it says,
Right. Okay. I think those are concerns. Does the Secretary of State's office have a position that they want to set forth in regards to this provision?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have concerns about this portion of the bill as well for from the items that you mentioned. I will let the committee know that right now there is an opportunity to unseal ballot boxes if there are documents or equipment that were left in them after the election that are needed after the election. And that process involves the Secretary of State going to the town with witnesses in the boxes to retrieve those items and then seal them. Getting specific to the Attorney General, if there is an investigation, a criminal investigation that they are undertaking related to ballots or an election, they do have the opportunity to go to the court and have the court grant an order that would allow them to open those boxes for that specific purpose. Aside from that, the boxes after election and all appeals are over are sealed, and they are kept for the mandatory 22 months as required by federal law after the election, at which point they are destroyed. Town election ballots are kept for 60 days.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee members on part 4 of this section of SB 89? Okay. I'm going to move on to section 5, which is relative to the duties of the registrars of probate. This actually probably did get the most public participation of all of the parts of this bill, as I recall. Committee members, comments, questions?
Madam Chair.
Representative Terosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, well, this part 5 certainly makes this a true omnibus bill in that it doesn't have a lot to do with election law, as far as I can tell. But having said that, it is in the New Hampshire Constitution that each county have a register of probate that does the work that needs to be, that's required under probate. And in 2011, we heard testimony that responsibility got shifted to the circuit court area. And, you know, there's certainly, in my mind, there's some merit to putting it back where the Constitution says it should be. For one reason, like the rest of us in the room, I took an oath to uphold the New Hampshire Constitution, and it seems like this got put in the wrong place as far as the Constitution was concerned. But the other part is that we did also hear testimony that suggested, and I've never been through the probate process, so I can't speak, you know, firsthand on that, is less responsive than it may have been and should be if the process was where the Constitution said it should be with the register of probate at the county level. So that's my comment. I'm not sure, you know, the best way to handle this. I know there's problems with money because this doesn't seem to fund. If we decide that this is what we should do, there is not money to fund that activity at the county level. And so that would be something that would have to be addressed. But anyway, those are some of my thoughts on the bill, on that section.
Okay. Other committee members? Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've talked to a number of people on this issue, and it's taken, this whole situation was changed originally for a reason, working that effectively. And I understand it's in the Constitution. An effort was made to take it out of the Constitution, and we know how constitutional amendments, how successful they usually are. But to bring this position back without a support staff, without proper funding, without any training, without even a clear place as to where that person's going to be working, I don't think makes any sense at all, and I think we should delete this. That's my comment.
Other comments? I guess my point on this section would be you either want it in or you want it out. I don't know that it appeared to be a section that, as to the content of it itself, that there was a lot of wordsmithing to do. Representative Groen. Representative Browen, can you unmute? We
Yes,
haven't heard
okay.
you. You need to unmute.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Representative McDonald that our Constitution requires this, and I wasn't very excited about it in 2011 when I remember dealing with this when I was in the Senate. But at this point, it seems to me kind of like requiring us to reintroduce brakemen that would reside in the caboose of a train that would have no function other than to sit there. And the responsibilities of this position have been given to the court. And for the most part, I think we're going to have a person without a position on salary.
Other questions or comments? Other than that, I request permission to use putting somebody in the caboose with no brakes work in the future. I like that. Anybody else on this section of 89? Okay.
Except that
anybody
we'll
else
see
on?
we will see it again, Madam Chair, no matter what happens.
No matter what happens, we will. Maybe not in election law, but it will be seen again. All right. Any other comments from committee members? All right. We've had I think we've had a consensus on a couple of sections of bills as to changes that may need to be made. We've had a couple of volunteers for amendments. We've had somebody already do an amendment. And maybe persons are going to do other amendments on different parts. We will not be having an executive session next week. I'm not quite sure at this point when it's going to be scheduled, but it will not be next week. And part of the point of that was so that if people wanted to do further amendments or have some more discussions about this bill, you have ample opportunity to before executive session, because I do anticipate we're going to have to deal with probably series of amendments on various parts of these bills. So I will let you know as soon as I've got it figured out for executive session. I don't anticipate a need to meet as a committee before the executive session. Anybody else have any other business they want to bring before the committee this morning or this afternoon? We did make it into afternoon.
Madam Chair, could I just ask that if people are preparing amendments that they distribute them as promptly as possible so that people have time
Yes,
to.
Yeah, thank you. And Pam, if you're still on.
Yes.
I just want to make it, thank you. I want to make it clear that as to these amendments, we'd be dealing with them as we would with amendments in any bill. If we're addressing a particular part of a bill and we have successive amendments, that they would essentially be overlaid as to the previous amendments and then incorporated into the final House bill as amended. Do I have that process correct or not?
Well, if I understood you, yes. I mean, I think if you have multiple amendments that are adopted to one of the omnibus bills, they would need to be unified after the executive session into a single amendment that would appear in the House calendar. They would not remain as separate amendments for the individual parts of the omnibus. They'd all be rolled into one. But each individual amendment that is worked on, it makes sense to address them as a single part.
Okay.
That's what you're asking. And I would ask that any amendments that come through, if people could include me on the distribution list. I'm not on the committee distribution list, but it would be helpful if I had them so I can make sure they're in the room for people that come in person on the day of the exec, and also have them to make that combined amendment. Thanks.
All right, thank you. All right, anybody else have any questions or comments? All right, I'm not seeing any. Thank you, everybody, for coming this morning, early afternoon, to talk about these bills. We'll get an executive session scheduled sometime in May. I will let you know as soon as I've got my calendar figured out. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of
Thank you,
the
Madam
committee.